one. I actually want to put this on the record. You were the first person I asked to be back on the podcast because a lot of people were asking me, like, when's your boss or your advisor coming on? And I'm like, listen, you're the first person I asked, but, it's started a semester, but then also, too, you have a young kid, so you're really busy on weekends and stuff like that. But, like, we finally just got around to it. So here we are now.
Yeah, I think in hindsight, weekends were the wrong block of the week to try to do this. But
yeah, you live and you learn. But we're here now. So today I welcome in my advisor, Professor Brad Carrow. I don't know. I've never heard anyone call you Bradley. Does anyone even call you Bradley? Parents, I assume?
Yeah, my mother would when I'm in trouble. That's generally, the full name comes out.
I assume Miha also calls you Bradley when she's upset, but I don't know.
I'm trying to think. I don't think so. I think it's just...
Just your mom?
Yeah, just the mother. The history there, I guess.
Interesting tidbit, too.
It's always the full first name plus the middle name. It's usually not half measures. It's usually all the way.
I was gonna say, because when you write stuff, when we have like our initials on our important Carrow Group business, you write BPC, and so I was like, your middle name is definitely Patrick, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Because my middle name's Patrick. So
look
at that.
Okay.
I think it just flows nicely. Patrick is a very nice middle name.
As far as I know, my family doesn't have any Irish heritage, although my father's name is Charles Patrick, and so his father's name was Charles as well. So there's like a continuity of same first names, and then the next generation with same middle names. He goes by Pat because of the same first name with his father. So
yeah. What is your heritage, anyways? Like, do you know?
Predominantly German. So my mother's side is from the kind of Ozarks area of Missouri, which is one of the areas that had a lot of German settlement back in the mid-19th century. And so a little bit of German on my father's side, and then almost all German and some French on my mother's side. And so it's predominantly German and French. I'm sure there's a few other cultures mixed in smaller amounts. And we have an English name. So I don't, before I watched English Premier League, I didn't realize that there's a Carrow Road, somewhat well known in the world of soccer. But otherwise, we don't have a lot of English heritage, despite the English family name.
I was gonna say, like, Carrow. I don't know, like, what that is English. You say, or like.
So that's the name of the road along the Norwich Stadium.
Yeah, right? Norwich. Yeah, Norwich. Not the Baggies. That's West Brom. What's the bird? I know it's Carrow Road, but Norwich. What's the bird that's there? I don't know. Whatever.
I don't know that much. Sorry.
It's gonna bother me. I'm gonna look this up. But okay, so Carrow is English. I'm gonna have to look this up now. It's really bothering me. Anyways, okay. Well, I looked this up though. So yeah, you grew up, like you mentioned, you say you grew up in the outside of St. Louis, the Midwest,
City, on the other side of the state of Missouri. Yeah, so the very east edge of the KC metro area. So yeah.
And how was that whole experience? Because I'm hearing mixed opinions of the Midwest here. I just made that up on the spot, but I'm very curious to hear the Midwest life because I come from the Northeast, so.
I don't know. What's your stereotype of the Midwest culture?
I feel like, well, in brief conversations we've had, I know when you were younger, like you kind of spend a lot of times on the farm. So, I mean, playing on the farm, stuff like that. I'm sure there's a lot of, growing vegetables and stuff like that. As far as, but like, I guess the biggest thing, there's no like standout. Like there's nothing like that sticks out in the Midwest, I suppose. Like, I mean, apart from the farming, I mean,
culturally, I don't think it's not so different culturally. I don't think. I think we're mostly talking about the minutia of American culture, right? So I would say maybe some of the more memorable aspects of living on the edge of suburbia really was more or less, my life in the early years was, the high school that I went to was actually in an unincorporated part of the county. So we had to drive out of technically the incorporated city limits to get to school. So we're really like right on the boundary of kind of urban life, suburban life. And then very quickly you transition out into the countryside. And a lot of my good friends in those days actually did kind of live out in the boonies, so to speak. Right. So you get a mix, right? My day was very much suburban. It's a grocery store just on the street, and I used to walk to elementary school. But then my mom's side of the family, coming from a farm down in the Ozarks, we would make many weekend trips and holiday trips down there. And so, a lot of my good memories of actually being on the farm.
Now, I have heard you say though in the past that the barbecue in the Midwest is better in the Midwest than here in Texas. Now, again,
I don't want
like I said,
hornet's nest, but
Well, listen, I mean, you're allowed to make these opinions here. You're allowed to. This is.
Yeah, but I don't know what your viewership is, but if it's overrepresented in Texas, I might get myself in hot water. But yeah, there's these kind of meccas of barbecue culture, right? So Kansas City is one of them. Texas is another. Memphis and the Carolinas, north and south, right? Historically, so I think Carolinas have very characteristic styles. The mustard in South Carolina and the vinegar sauce and pork. So I feel like there's not a lot of controversy because it's such a kind of unique or focused take on barbecue there. But Kansas City and Texas are definitely, I think there's a lot of overlap. Maybe brisket in Texas, so to speak. But I would say probably part of it is just a lot of Kansas City barbecue is every place that gets really famous has like their own spice mix and especially their own sauce. And so even if you do really good, smoked meats, there's still something that's just kind of special about that one place, that has their own blends, their own recipes. And so it's hard to reproduce that anywhere else. So of course, anywhere else you go in Kansas City or elsewhere, it's going to be different. So the variety of it is the best part, I think. So I've had really good barbecue since we moved to Houston. I've been really happy about that because it would be the downside of living, you're from Philly, right? And being on that Mid-Atlantic, generally speaking, there's pretty much a dearth of good barbecue, probably like downtown New York, there's a few good places here and there.
Right. But yeah, good barbecue. I can't even, there's maybe like not fast food. Oh my God, I'm forgetting the chain restaurant. Like there's one, but barbecue just is not a thing. And I even now, like been here, I only eat barbecue maybe like once a month. I can't really eat it more than that. Like I just can't.
It's a heavy meal. It's not really, I don't think you feel great doing it every day.
So I guess, do you so people that grow up where barbecue is like a normal thing, do they even eat it often? Like, do you actually eat it often though? Or is it kind of like a nice meal you'd cook up like once a week or something like that?
Well, it depends a little bit on how serious the family is about it. I had, one of my best friends had an uncle who would do the national competition tours, and so it's like an everyday thing for that family. But for us, I would say it's predominantly a special occasion, right? Because both of my parents were working parents, and so it takes a full day to smoke something, right? Basically, dawn almost. So it's a big time commitment. So I think for that reason alone, it's not something you do every day, and you just make a ton of it in one go, and then you have good leftovers for a week or more.
So I know the food in general, I know like in the Midwest, like barbecue can be really good, but there's nothing else that like kind of sticks out to you. Like let's say like we're in Kansas City, like, oh, here's some things that I would you'd recommend.
In terms of just entertainment or just
entertainment. Underrated spots,
Kansas City specifically has the maybe a factoid that you wouldn't expect. It has the second most fountains for a city next to Rome in the world.
What? That's a lie. You're capping. Hang on.
There's a lot of fountains around Kansas City. You can fact check me on that. So that's one of the nice things all around the city is you'll find fountains everywhere scattered about. And it has one of the larger city parks in the United States as well after Central Park. With the city zoo in the middle of it. So,
when it comes to functional fountains, Kansas City, Missouri, United States claims this is the World Atlas. So I don't think you're capping. I think you're telling the truth here. That's pretty cool. But on that, I've congratulated you before because the Kansas City Chiefs got their second Super Bowl in 4 years, 5 years. It's definitely, you're finally getting your comeuppance.
Yeah, for a sports fan,
perpetual mediocreness.
These days, yeah, it's great.
Yeah,
living it up my whole life until the last few years, until the Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes era, was a struggling sports franchise. So
the Royals were good for. Well, they won a World Series in 2015, but they've kind of been really bad since.
They peaked, right? But that's the big difference between professional baseball and football, right? Is the difference in money between the teams is so dramatic that for the Royals, the stars just aligned for a few years where they had they've always had a really good farm team, so they've always had really good talent that comes in. But as soon as they're free agents, they're on down the road to some rich baseball team, right? So we just kind of had that moment in time where everything aligned, and we had those two good runs back to back. So that was also very special because that was, the last Royals World Series was when I was just a few years old back in the George Brett years in the mid 80s. So
I'll never forget that 2014 World Series because I was watching when Madison Bumgarner basically shut down the Royals. That was an incredible game. It must have been really upsetting for you, but I was watching that, and Madison Bumgarner is definitely one of my favorite pitchers of all time.
Yeah.
So, I
don't remember. That might have been his second time pitching in the series too, right?
Yeah, he came in the fifth inning, I think, and just mowed it down. But very unfortunate for Kansas City fans. But then you guys won the World Series, I think, the next year. So
yeah, it was back.
You got one. Now, how do you feel about I don't know, because I'm not. You're obviously more adamant to football. So I don't even when you first saw Patrick Mahomes kind of come in, did you know he was going to be a superstar? Or did you watch him in college at all? I'm not really familiar with that.
At the time I was still out in the East Coast. And so, being, not having the really expensive football packages and whatnot, I didn't really see the Chiefs
illegal
play
streams
very often. So my mother, since she retired, has started to get season tickets, gotten in, to be a pretty hardcore football fan in retirement. And so she would feed me a lot of the scuttlebutt about the team development. And so I kind of heard about how excited they were about this young guy that they just drafted from Texas Tech. So I really didn't know much about him until that kind of made its way to me through the family. It turned out to be prophetic because he was, of course, a superstar from day one.
A lot of NFL pundits are, already, because he did win his second Super Bowl, they're already saying he's on that Brady trajectory, and I definitely can't argue with that. He's got 2 in his first 5 years, something like that. Yeah. So, and only really Brady and Montana, I think, are on that level. So
yeah, it's a special time.
I'm very excited to see, especially the Bills kind of crashed out this year a little bit, but the whole Burrow, the AFC is interesting. Between Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, Burrow, and obviously Mahomes. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. It's a new generation of athletes, right? There's been kind of the passing of the baton with Tom Brady finally retiring, right? So all these guys that I watched for many years are now on their way out. And when I was a little kid, it was even the generation prior to that, right? I used to be also a Cowboys fan when I was really young. Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, Michael Irving years. That was kind of my superstar team to watch while the Chiefs were kind of yucking it up.
Right. A lot of Eagles fans will feel the same way with their, we lost Super Bowl this year, but we won in 2017, so they're kind of getting their comeuppance because for, the 90s, the Cowboys just ran it. So it's Eagles are finally getting there, showing. NFC's kind of wide open in a sense. I mean, the Eagles still should go far next year. I mean, I can't think of any other really team. Obviously the 49ers, I guess, would be the other ones.
You still some of the historical powerhouses, right? Cowboys are still good. Eagles are good. Right. 49ers. Green Bay's kind of back into rebuilding now, but
I think they're gonna get rid of Rodgers though, so I think he'll move on. So all these quarterbacks, man, it's a new age of quarterbacks. But so moving on, like, so you, that's a bit of a tangent, but I kind of like these conversations, though. It feels good. But you did your BS in chemistry, so you kind of stayed in the Missouri area for your undergrad. You did it at Missouri University of Science and Technology. So how was that kind of undergraduate experience? Is that a big school?
It's part of the UM system, but they are
okay.
They were historically back when they were founded. They were founded as a Missouri School of Mines, so it has a history in mining, and then over time they also built up a lot of the engineering expertise. So it's got a pretty strong, historically top 50 and sometimes even better engineering program for a relatively small school. So it's not as big as Mizzou, for instance, in Columbia, the flagship. So it's like a Division III size school. But yeah, so for me, when I was heading into college, at the time, money was a consideration for us. And at the time, if you tested high enough in your ACT, SAT scores, if you hit like, I think it fluctuates from year to year, but when I was graduating, it was like, 97th or higher percentile. If you hit that threshold, you would get automatically an scholarship to go to any state university in Missouri. And so then that basically locked me in, because that was a huge windfall for us to have kind of a pretty substantial scholarship, merit-based. And then between a couple of possible state universities, my best friends in chemistry in high school were actually going to other places like Truman State, which is up in Northeast Missouri. But Rolla offered me on top of that a departmental fellowship from chemistry, because I already knew I wanted to do chemistry at that point in time. And so I was
just going to ask you about that. Like, I've basically heard two stories so far. One, people had growing up, middle school, high school, they had really good chemistry professors. And they kind of went with that. But I've also heard the other side where it's like they hated chemistry and didn't find out about it until late college. It's either one or the other, I swear. Like there's no in between.
So I'm the first one, I guess. So I had Miss Reese was my teacher's name, who really kind of fostered our interest in science. So there's a couple, three of us, and there was also a few more people, but three of us who were close, who were part of kind of like the after school, like science club type activities crew, so to speak. And the three of us really kind of got in the good graces of Miss Reese. Miss Reese was actually a really enthusiastic teacher. She was a biology teacher by training, but she took over chemistry at our high school. Still just kind of like dedicated herself to like making people like chemistry. So she was very kind of extroverted, and we'd sing chemistry songs, and she would do all these things to kind of generate interest and keep our attention.
Do you still remember those songs?
No, we did the Element song. I couldn't sing it from memory.
Okay.
I remember the tune if I heard it. But we're gonna bring that back. The three of us, particularly, she would let us when we were there after school for chemistry trivia or whatever we were doing at the time. She would also let us just go raid the stockroom and just grab stuff and do, arguably dangerous experiments, but things that boys would do.
Simple times, man.
Yeah, permanganate glycerin and hydrogen oxygen and various things like that. Make colors. So we had a blast doing that. You can't get away with that sort of thing today, I guess. But that really, to excuse the pun, that really lit the fire under us. And like at that point, we were pretty into doing chemistry as a college major. I think we were kind of had our mind set up at that point.
That's really cool. I definitely was not doing that stuff in high school. But
yeah,
glad to see it worked out.
We had the high school that we were at. It was a kind of a rectangular setup with a courtyard in the middle. And one day we went out, and I was the tag along at the time for liability purposes in this recorded conversation. But had a relatively large acetylene oxygen balloon at the end of a yardstick that somebody lit off. In the courtyard, and the boom. It was during class time. It was during the middle of the day. So this was ostensibly somebody's extra credit project. I don't remember how this got authorized. Maybe it was described in a slightly more benign way on paper. The boom was really loud, and the nurses came running down the hallway thinking something had exploded, a gas line or something, and thinking there was going to be casualties all over the place. And so we got a lot of flack for that. But this is back pre 2000, so pre 9/11 for sure. So there's no way, high school kids could get away with those shenanigans these days. We all get kicked out for doing that. But of course, for us, that was a blast at the time. We had a lot of fun, like really treading the edge of what you could get away with. As we tend to do.
So just on that real quick, and like, I guess the interest in chemistry at like a high school level in general, I'm throwing you a little bit of a curveball here, but like, oh shoot, lost my train of thought. So how we teach chemistry at that high school level, has it like changed at all in the last like 50 years? I mean, like, is it like, I know you teach like undergraduate chemistry. I don't know if that's changed at all in the last 50 years. Probably not. But I'm just wondering how to get people more interested in chemistry, because like I mentioned before, like people that I go to high school with, either they love chemistry or they hate it. There was like no in between, They're like, oh, I failed chemistry or like whatever. And I'm just wondering if is it actually like a substance? Like it's actually, I mean, it is a difficult subject in some respects, but it just seems like the way it's taught is more of the issue, I think.
Yeah. I guess I could say a couple things. I think the first is I don't think the pedagogy has changed that much. I'm not as familiar with, I can't speak from firsthand experience in the high school level, but this is my impression. And I believe I'm more confident to say that's the case for Gen Chem at the college level. But also at the same time, I think there's a pretty strong consensus amongst many faculty that there is a need to change Gen Chem. There's a lot of things that we teach at the general chemistry level that we don't think is that useful for those that go on to be majors. So if there's that strong of feelings amongst many faculty in that discipline, I think that's a sign that just because this is the way that it's been done for a long time, and there's a lot of inertia to that, right? It feeds into other courses, and there's testing, AP chemistry related to, like, there's a lot of reasons that things might not change dramatically over time. But I think nobody's really arguing that there are a lot of things that are covered in general chemistry that just don't really prove to be useful or used day to day if you go on and take organic chemistry or inorganic or analytical chemistry, maybe to a lesser extent, and subsequently, if you're a chemistry major. So if that's true, then that I think is a pretty strong sign that even worse are the non-chemistry majors. If the chemistry majors don't take much away from it, then that should be even exacerbated for non-chemistry majors.
Right.
How do you reimagine that material to be more relevant to people who are not going down a chemistry track? So I would think we're still at the kind of the stage of thinking that it still needs to be kind of re-envisioned and implemented in a different way, but it hasn't really kind of rolled out across the board at all universities for sure.
I don't even remember what it was like the curriculum of general chemistry. Like I don't even remember, like maybe introductory to quantum chemistry, but I don't even know if that counts. Like molecular orbitals and maybe. I don't even remember.
Equilibria, right? Molality, molarity, normality.
I guess I could take that stuff for granted now, so I don't like
unit conversions and things of these. We definitely use unit conversions routinely.
Yeah.
There's plenty of things that are more esoteric to general chemistry, I would say.
Well, perhaps that'll be another discussion for another day. How to fix general chem. Actually, would be an interesting discussion. Actually, I don't know. Maybe I should bring in an expert like who is like really like we need to change the whole system. Actually, probably be a really cool discussion.
Some people are already kind of forging ahead. The one I can think of specifically, I believe this is more than one person working on this, but David Liu at Harvard, I think, had kind of totally overhauled some of the general chemistry or freshman chemistry courses to be more in the format of a case study. So for every kind of principle of general chemistry that they wanted to cover, it would be first presented in the context of something that had happened in recent newsworthy events or, topical things that people would recognize as something interesting or important that has happened in the last few years. Right. then you really get into the science behind, the news clippings, so to speak. And that's, I think, a really good way to kind of provide context. When should we care about these topics in the real world? And if you start off with a real world example where this kind of thing is can be discussed, and that connection is really apparent to the students. Then it takes a huge amount of work, I would imagine, to do that. But there's certainly a lot of people who are pulling on that thread for sure.
Yeah, that would be. I might have to follow up with that, because that would be really interesting, I think. Plus, everything nowadays with being online and open access, I basically learned NMR from James Noack, and all of his stuff is open access UV Irvine. So I'm sure that there's something like that for every chemistry category. So, top universities, how can they compete with open access stuff? I mean, there's the whole peer review kind of thing, but I don't know, you can really learn a lot of chemistry online nowadays. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
In my opinion, right? I mean, the only downside to it is universities might make less money. Fewer people enrolling in courses, but is that a bad thing? First of all, I think not. But also, there's only to somebody like your experience just now, talking about learning some NMR techniques. You're able to do that yourself because you're already a pretty advanced, knowledgeable person in a lot of areas.
I hope so.
So if somebody's just cracking open the book for the first time ever, and they're cracking the book on this NMR spectroscopy material, right, they're going to be completely lost. So I think there's still a need for instruction and the ability to ask questions and get feedback, and that interactive experience is still, I think, an important part of education. And you don't get that from just watching a video necessarily. I think it's good to have those available, and I think more of it would be a good thing as well. But at the same time, I don't think it totally takes away the other aspects of interactive education.
Now, when you were at your undergraduate, though, did you do any undergraduate research at all, or what were you working on?
So I worked with Tom Schuman, who's a materials scientist in the chemistry department, and I would say arguably the material science division at my college was one of the strengths in sciences, more so than the traditional chemistry department. So he had several projects going on at the time related to corrosion inhibition, and so my project was basically making ammonium silanes that basically would be things that you would coat a surface with as a way to fix some corrosion inhibitor salts effectively on a surface. So I was basically quaternizing amines. I did some organometallic chemistry because I definitely remember, for reasons that are not clear to me, I ended up ordering 10 molar butylithium because I thought it was a good value on a molar basis. And then I found out it's a lot more pyrophoric than, the 1.7 molar butylithium. And so at the time, I remember catching some paper on fire from where the syringe dripped a little bit and caught some, I think it was some brown paper liner on fire. I learned a pretty quick appreciation for organometallic chemistry. But
can you even buy 10 molar Butyl now?
Good question. Maybe not. I think 2.5 may be the highest these days. It was extremely viscous. I don't know. I think probably it's hard to work with as well. So maybe it has been discontinued.
I wouldn't even touch that. Well, actually, I would touch that with a 10-foot pole. That would actually be kind of fun. But
yeah, I think it's no different than normal butylithium. But yeah, so we did that. What else? There was some other project I also worked on at the time, but it's lost to my memory at the moment.
Maybe it'll come back to you.
Yeah, but otherwise it was materials related chemistry. Making some surface coating agents, and there was a graduate student who would help do the more sophisticated things, where these would go into a salt mist testing machine that basically would mimic a marine type environment and see how quickly these things would corrode with and without the different modifiers. And
that's pretty cool.
Ostensibly, the idea was to phase out chromium-based corrosion inhibitors, which obviously are pretty toxic. So at the time, they were really focused on cerium-based things, but you needed ways to get the cerium to basically stick to metal parts, things that you would make planes out of and whatnot, so aluminum plates and things like that.
Is cerium that much less toxic than chromium?
Mm-hmm. It's also relatively common as well. It's technically a rare earth, but I think its crustal abundance is higher than lead, right? And so we're never in our lifetimes we're never sort of running out of lead for sure. So it's one of the more abundance amongst the rare earths.
Now, because you're obviously like a chemistry student, you're going in for chemistry. You might have already had the thoughts or ambition to do undergraduate research, but like, how was that like approach? Like, did you just ask him, or like had that?
I believe this came up not necessarily because I knew it was something I wanted to do. He taught the polymer chemistry course that I had taken, and he basically had just broached the subject. And I don't know. I don't remember necessarily how well I did in the polymer chemistry course. If it was because I was doing well in the class, or we just maybe had a rapport or something. I don't know. But he basically brought up the idea of it, and that was more or less how I got into it. So I didn't really know what I was stepping into from day one, other than it would be maybe something like I was doing in the polymer chemistry class. But yeah, basically I took a liking to it right away, and I spent a lot of time in the lab doing undergrad research through the remaining years.
That's really cool. Mm-hmm. So after your undergrad, you went on to go do your Ph.D. with John Hartwig at the time, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign?
Urbana-Champaign, yeah.
Urbana-Champaign. So when did you know you like wanted to do graduate school? And I guess a lot of people will say like, it's not the school, it's your advisor, especially nowadays. I don't know if that was true when you were a graduate student, like people like saying, nah, it's your advisor, not the school. So, well, actually, I guess I can ask you directly. Did you even know about John Hartwig? Like, or
I mean, he wasn't the school at the Illinois time I was kind of applying. That was a development after the fact. And in fact, I was, not surprisingly, based on my undergrad research, I was kind of more thinking along the lines of doing a materials type PhD track. And so, for instance, Jeff Moore at UIUC was somebody I was very interested in, and so on and so forth. But then his move from Yale to UIUC came up, and he had made a number of visits at the time where we were meeting with faculty and trying to decide on which labs to join. So it was very much a kind of spontaneous development. And I had known about him because prior to UIUC, I had actually deferred for a year so that I could keep working at a company that I had kind of been involved with in one of my earlier research projects. They brought me in to actually work rather than collaborate with them. And at the time, we were doing some cross-coupling to make precursors to polymer thin films. And so, and I had worked with at that time with a guy named Rex Murray. He was a chemist at Union Carbide for many years, and had done a lot of really important work in developing catalysts for olefin polymerization and other business at Union Carbide, I'm sure. But I know some of the patents with his name on it that are related to the phosphine sulfonate ligands that I think you've probably heard Tony and some of the guys in our group talk about over time.
The Drent?
Yeah, so he had basically taken a buyout from Union Carbide, and part of that buyout was a no-compete clause. So for 2 years, he couldn't work for any company that basically did competing business. And so he came to this little company.
Is John Hartwig still? Or wait.
This guy, Rex Murray.
Oh, okay.
He was at this little company that I was working at prior to grad school, and he, John, that is, had consulted with Union Carbide. So he actually knew John personally, and I had gotten interested in cross-coupling because we were doing that sort of stuff at this company.
I see, okay.
And so then, this is how it kind of percolated, that once I was at UIUC, then I had contacted Rex, because I remember him talking about John and asked his opinions and whatnot, and he gave lots of kind of glowing reports about John as a chemist. And that kind of I would say kind of nucleated my interest in kind of switching from a materials type research track to more in the lines of catalysis.
So that definitely brings up the natural question, and what was your graduate? What was your research on in graduate school?
My research was purely mechanistic organometallic chemistry. So I studied over the years, a couple of different cross-coupling reactions. It was all CC bond-forming reactions, so I actually did never work on any of the group's amination chemistry. But of course, I learned about that by osmosis over the years. But yeah, it was speaking of the advisor deciding kind of thing at UIUC. In those conversations that I had with John when we were trying to join labs, I strictly remember him asking me about, what sort of projects do you want to work on? Are you interested in kind of methodology or, pure synthesis or, this mechanism? And I distinctly remember saying I would be probably most interested in doing synthesis or methodology. And his response was something to the effect of, "Oh, well, how would you feel about working on mechanism?" And I don't know if that was because he kind of saw something about the way I think about chemistry, or if he just wanted somebody to work on that project. But I definitely didn't expect to start working in the area of reaction mechanisms, but I definitely took an affinity to it pretty quickly. I mean, the first couple of years of grad school were frustrating. The projects weren't working very well. But once things started to click, I got pretty into it. And so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that he saw something in me that I didn't see about, me potentially being an aficionado of mechanisms. But definitely that's persisted over time.
I was going to say, you are like one for mechanisms and understanding those things. So I was going to ask, is that something that's kind of grown onto you? Because like you mentioned, you kind of came from a material science background, I guess. So it's like, actually understanding the mechanism of some material science is important for sure. But, I did not see you as like a synthesis kind of guy. Now methodology is important, but it's kind of funny.
Mm-hmm. No, it's definitely something that developed over time, the interest in it. And, I had a lot of great faculty at UIUC, Scott Denmark and Peter Beek and these guys who are really very strong, their research has a lot of the hallmarks of great mechanistic understanding and appreciation for physical organic chemistry. And so kind of surrounded by people like this in the department. And I think that also helped kind of, teach me a lot for sure, but also gave me a better appreciation for organic chemistry.
I'm finding a trend that a lot of the people that understand chemistry the best and maybe have a lot of success are people that actually understand these mechanisms very well. I mean, people that come to mind are when I speak to Jeff Byers and Paul Chiric, who worked under John Bearcall, who's mechanistic guy for polymerizations. When I spoke to Mary Watson, Dave Evans, understanding the mechanism of oxazolidinone. So it's these recurring themes of if you understand these mechanisms in the ins and outs, there is a more high propensity for you to be a very successful chemistry and wherever that takes you. But I'm finding that theme over and over again.
Yeah.
So that's pretty interesting, I think. So you were working on the mechanistic studies of CC bond formation. For people that don't know, I mean, I'll say this, that John Hartwig, is, most known form in the chemistry world for, CN amination, basically making carbon nitrogen bonds, along with Buchwald at MIT. So that's kind of how he's known within the chemistry community. And I'm actually unfamiliar with Hartwig ligands, I guess. I'm so used to the Buchwald ligands. I'm drawing blank on any Hartwig ligands, but
well, there's a number of them, but I guess they don't have as kind of a clean a packaging as the biaryl phosphines do as a family, right? So kind of a conserved motif across all those biaryl phosphines. But definitely, QFOS is one that comes to mind, and I think the chemistry from his group has been a little more agnostic about ligand identity, right? It's a lot more about structure activity relationships, mechanistic understanding. And so the particular ligand is I think less consequential than understanding its influence, but QFOS is one that comes to mind. And we could get into a longer conversation, but there are some here and there. But some of the really, really efficient amination catalysts that were developed, slightly before, during my time, in the group were commercial ligands, the Josephus Sylvius ligands. And I think that's kind of become much more of a thing these days. Is there's enough ligands that you can buy. The combinations are pretty diverse in terms of commercially available ligands that now it makes a lot more sense to basically screen through all of those before you really get into a kind of de novo synthesis type project and designing these things on your own, because very often it is the case that if you have an idea about what would be a great ligand for a reaction and you go through the effort to make it, you'll find out that you weren't quite right. And it might be okay, but it's very rarely the case that the first ligand that you think of is exactly the best for some particular application. So that's a tough game to play. If you really get deep into the mechanistic aspect to it, in some cases I think you can have enough information to design, but oftentimes it makes a lot of sense to screen as well and find your hits. And then once you find something interesting, you can go in and look into the details about exactly why that is.
Yeah, I feel like ligand design is there's obviously like a few cases where I guess in hindsight, like the ligand choices and how they work makes sense. But I also feel like there's a part of it where it's like you have a ligand in this particular chemistry, and if it works, it works, and then you figure out how it works, you know? Not like you conceptualize it and then you're going to apply it. I guess it's kind of both, but after, well, actually, I want to ask you about this too. Is the culture at University of Illinois? Was it a fun place to be? What'd you guys do on weekends? Because it's I'm sure it's very different than Houston. There's a lot of things to do in Houston, but.
One of the things that I think is a little bit similar about Urbana-Champaign is for the relatively small town outside of the college population, even though it's sister cities, had a pretty good food culture. I actually really enjoyed a lot of the eateries around town, and arguably there was a brew pub called Black Dog that made really good barbecue, and you always know a good barbecue joint when there's a line out the door, right? And this place almost always had a line out the door. And I believe, years after I left, I believe it's a top 50 barbecue place in the country now. And at the time, it was just a brew pub, in a college town that made really good barbecue. But I think word got around.
That's sick.
But yeah, so, for a guy who grew up in the Midwest and didn't really travel anywhere to that point in time, probably a half a dozen or more Japanese restaurants, Korean, all of your different cuisines that you're after. It's really good Thai places. One of them right next to the Quad, which is close to chemistry. It was called Basil Thai, I think. And I had another location much closer to the chemistry department. And it was essentially a family place. So the kids operated the place close to chemistry. And it was pretty good and convenient. But the one a little bit farther out on Green Street was operated by the patriarch of the family. Essentially, he would run the wok, and that was the one that I would go to because I think he made better stuff. Padwin Sen is what I used to eat a lot, but he also remembered people, even though it's a college town with 40,000 students. He remembered when I came in, and he would wave to me. He didn't speak English, but he recognized the people that would come back as repeat customers, and that was a pretty cool experience. So the food scene I really liked. The pub scene was also pretty good. It's a big college town, right? This was a point in time when I started to play golf as a hobby because I was geographically pretty far. When I was a little bit younger, I used to do more fly fishing. Yeah. When I was in college, I was pretty close to good places in the Ozarks to go find trout in the streams. But having, no ability to do that really, except a few times a year, maybe on road trips. Golf, there was a really good university golf course that was very cheap for students in the twilight hours. And so I would try to get out on a Friday evening and play 9 holes, or on the weekend here and there. So that was fun.
Yeah, it's a golf. My dad plays and my brother plays as well. My dad's pretty good. My brother's starting to get the hang of it. He's very average at this point. He's 21 years old. But golf for me, I feel like part of the problem is I've never had a proper golf set. So like I'm much taller than my dad. So I've always used his club. So it's like I just can't shoot. You need clubs that fit you for one.
Yeah.
But I also feel like there's kind of two ways to learn golf. One is like brute force on your own. Like, and I guess nowadays it's kind of easy. You can like look up videos and stuff like that. And I suppose now we have like the virtual stuff where you can go to like Top Golf and kind of work on your swings there. But, getting on the golf course, I mean, the best practice is just getting on the golf course and doing it. But like that repetition takes so much time. And it's like, God, I really don't want to put that much, like, I don't want to like learn this whole new hobby. So if you're ever on the golf course, I'll gladly like drive the cart, smoke cigars and drink beers and, cheer you on.
Do whatever you like at the end of the day. It's
right.
If it speaks to you, you can do it. But yeah, definitely a lot of things to help pass the time and to stay in shape, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, golf. Maybe one of these days, but that day is not today. Now, but then actually after your graduate career, you decided to go do a postdoc over at University of Tokyo, right? University of Tokyo. Yep. Okay. Yep. With Kyoko Nozaki.
Correct.
That's that right?
You did.
And I guess the question I have for you now is like, why did you go decide to do a postdoc over in Japan of all places? I know Nozaki is a very notable name within the chemistry community, but I mean, from someone that stayed within the Midwest and all of a sudden you're going to move to all the way across the world. I mean, what was that kind of conversation like with like your friends and family, especially your parents?
It was pretty scary feeling at about the time when it was really decision-making time on saying yes or no. But to back it up a little bit, the original kind of there were two things that kind of got me interested in that possibility. And I would say the first one is that there was some side projects that I had been involved in with John on doing some catalytic chemistry related to functionalizing polymers. But as part of that, I got to reading about the early work that her group had done with late metal catalyzed olefin polymerization. And so I'd kind of been reading in that subject area a little bit as kind of background for this side project. And then the second thing was that I got to be the group representative for the Hartwig group, that is, to go to Japan. There was actually a conference for basically students and postdocs rather than faculty to attend. And the format was that it was an alternating presentation by somebody from the host university, which was Tohoku University in Sendai, and then a visitor. And so I spent about 4 or 5 days, I think it was, in Sendai, and I had been to maybe, Canada.
I was going to say, this culture shock here, like
point in my life. Yeah. And of course we had hosts, students who helped us get around and whatnot. But otherwise it was a really cool experience because it was so different. And then when it came time to decide on a postdoc area, I had kind of built this interest in working in the area of olefin polymerization and mostly with the late metals, the functionalized polymers. And so Kyoko's group is, of course, one of the really high profile groups in that area. And then, maybe a couple of the others that were in kind of my short list were Rich Jordan, who's at University of Chicago before he retired, and Stefan Mecking in Germany. And so I didn't really want to stay in Illinois that much longer at that point in my life. And then so between Germany and Japan, I think I tilted towards Japan because I had been there one time before, and that even though it was culturally so different, I at least had been there one time versus 0 times to Germany to that point in my life. But also John knew Kyoko, and so he was very clear that she's just a pretty special person, that she should be a really good person to work for. There are some Japanese faculty who are a little more hardcore, kind of, I would say, bordering on too harsh on their group sometimes. And that's true in other places around the world. But the point is that, I wouldn't necessarily want to go work for somebody who, didn't kind of support me as somebody who's in a very uncomfortable situation in the early days,
right,
living in a foreign country, not speaking the language. So Kyoko actually, preceding my time there, had already fostered a culture where she expected her group to learn a lot of English to become more of an international researcher and scientist. And so I think her group and a few others at the University of Tokyo really stand head and shoulders above the others in terms of their ability to speak in English and interact in English. Their chemistry, they have their own jargon in Japanese, so it's even hard to follow by trying to key in on chemistry words if you don't speak Japanese. So it's really essential to be multilingual if you're going to interact, outside of your own country. And so, that familiarity between my current advisor and my prospective advisor over there was really, I think, important for me pulling the trigger on that opportunity.
Nice.
And it was all true. And then some. Kyoko is actually, she's special. She's a world-class person. Personally, intellectually, she's very, I think, underappreciated in terms of all of the nice things and great things that she is and does. So very lucky on my part that I kind of fumbled into that opportunity, because it turned out to be pretty life-changing for me.
What were some of the key differences that kind of stick out to you? Obviously, we can make a whole laundry list of differences between America and Japan. But what were some of the ones that really really stuck out to you, I guess?
Well,
you first got over there.
In general, or you mean specifically?
Yeah, general. Well, I guess you could do both, honestly.
Okay. Well, yeah, just generally, it's a huge culture shock for me, but it was happened in such a good way, to this Midwestern kind of semi-redneck kind of kid to go live in Japan for a while. And, one of the great things about that is that culture contrast really shines a light on your own culture, right? And changes your point of view. You look at a lot of the things that you do and think and realize there's no good reason for you to to have this or that opinion. It's not based on anything that's kind of a worldwide belief, right? It's just this arbitrary thing from your insulated life in one particular area of the world. And so that culture contrast actually shines mostly a lens on your own life rather than the other way around, I think. I always feel like people are really good difference engines. If you ask them to make an absolute judgment, we're pretty hard to hit the mark. But if you ask us to provide a contrast between two things, I think we are usually very precise about the differences between those sorts of side-by-sides. But anyway, so in Japan, Japanese culture, they're so much more collective, right? They operate in a way where there's value in anything you do that helps out your the fellow people around you, right? So there's no shame in jobs that are not high profile. A janitor is a respectful profession. Everybody does something that helps out those around them, and that they are motivated to do what they do for those reasons as well. So very opposite of the kind of independent American perspective, right, where everybody's kind of trying to get their own, so to speak. And that's not true for everybody, but definitely that's a motivating.
Yeah, generally speaking, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I also feel like
very nice. And as a visitor, they're extremely accommodating, right? And so you get the best of that accommodating mentality. They really bend backwards for visitors in particular. So, but it's also nice to just see people who want to do things just because it's good to do for the benefit of not themselves but people around them. I really appreciate that aspect of their culture. It's still very much a patriarchy, so it's definitely not a perfect culture, right? They have their own flaws and things that I think they want to change over time, but it's hard to change in the culture.
Right.
But there are some very admirable attributes for sure.
I was gonna say when a lot of their heritage is the samurai, and the way the samurai that is a very, it's very not tough's not the right word, but it's very like regimented, you know.
Yeah,
just
they're
the
very
way
structured.
it is,
Very structured society. Yeah.
and the way that they handle their like, I mean, like you mentioned, like their work, like they're just built different. Like they handle their job very well. Any job, any like, any job. So that's really, yeah. Hoping one of these days I'm gonna get out there, and see what it's like. Look forward to it. I think I'd rather go to Germany though. But I definitely have a bias towards that. I got to get out of the States though and go explore the world a little bit.
Yeah.
We'll get there in time though.
Yeah, find your chances and go.
What was the chemistry that you worked on there? Because I know generally speaking it's polymerizations, but I wonder if we can break this down a little bit more.
No, it was very much this idea of functionalizing polyolefins, from the bottom up, right? So there's kind of two tracks to take in terms of making nonpolar polymers have additional functionality. You can take the parent polymer and after it's prepared, you can try to functionalize the bulk material, which is hard to do because these are semi-crystalline materials, high melting. Or you can make a new material from the bottom up where from the get-go you're copolymerizing the parent olefin with something else so that the polar functional groups are kind of in there in the original polymerization. In theory, a more cost-effective way to do it. In theory, you have the potential for microstructure control if the catalyst has some ability to dictate sequence. And so there's a lot of potential there, but of course there's mechanistically a lot of things that make it a tough thing to do. So for those reasons, it was kind of a pretty intriguing area of research for somebody like me at the time who was really into mechanism and, PhD research. It seemed like this area, and you learn about the history of metallocene catalysts and olefin polymerization as well. And it's this really special area where you can do this really fundamental work in catalysis and organometallic chemistry, and then through this really short bridge, it potentially has like very obvious and immediate practical applications and could be implemented on large scale if you really hit it out of the park. But there's not a lot of stuff in between, right? In terms of, maybe as a counter analogy, if you discover a lead compound for potentially a therapeutic use in the world of pharmacology, there could be a lot of stuff that happens between that lead and,
right.
phase 3 trials and FDA approval, right?
That's a long road. That's a long road.
Yeah. So that, and getting back to my interest in materials chemistry was also something that was intriguing to me. So that's effectively what my day-to-day was, is I was thinking about, the limitations. This area is not new, right? It had been around for a couple of decades already when I was kind of jumping into it. And there are limitations to all of the catalysts and methods to that point in time, controlling the molecular weight of the materials, controlling the sequence, as I said. The amount of monomer A versus monomer B was pretty hard to tune up and down at will, and especially tuning them all towards the direction that you want to go was generally not possible. Like as you tune one up, you tended to tune down another property, and so that was kind of paradox, if you will, about how the catalysts sort of control these different outcomes in the polymer structure and the rates and whatnot.
So what would area for the viewers, what would like a perfect catalyst be able to do? Like what would obviously there's plenty of different applications for polymers in general, but I guess what would be the fundamental characteristics of I guess the tunability of the catalyst? What would be like a perfect catalyst?
Well, I mean, in the world of polymers, it's a huge chemical industry by scale, right? And so above all else, your catalyst has to be exquisitely reactive, right? You have to be able to turn over, many units of monomer per unit of catalyst so that at the end of the day, the amount of input of catalyst per ton of polymer is really minuscule. Otherwise, it's an industry where profit is pennies per pound or few dollars per ton. So the amount of catalyst, which is relatively expensive, has to be relatively small. And so that threshold for activity is really in the upper echelon of enzymes, right? The kinetics of enzymes is usually considered to be in a different league from the rates of most catalytic reactions that we do in organic chemistry, right? But you have to approach that level in the world of polymerization. Otherwise, it's just not cost competitive. So that's a really hard benchmark to meet in its own right. And then that alone is still not enough. So you would also want the perfect catalyst to be able to essentially be living, to grow a polymer chain infinitely, so that the upper limit of the molecular weight is extremely high. You can always add a chain transfer agent that would tune that molecular weight down. So you really want the upper threshold to be as high as it possibly can, because you can always bring it back down with external force, essentially, with additives like chain transfer agents or temperature or something. And so in that way, you need polymers that are really high molecular weight, because in the real world, you need entanglement of polymer chains, physical, mechanical interlocking of molecular chains to get really high physical properties that you're after. And so low molecular weights just are not going to cut it for most of those applications. And then the hardest one by far is sequence control. Right, if you're adding more than one monomer, and the combinations of ways that they are, consecutively linked together, ultimately you would want absolute control over that. A lot of times it's relatively statistical. Our catalysts are not really, anywhere close to how nature stitches together, nature's polymers, protein or nucleic acid structures. But, somewhere between completely statistical and nature's control of peptide sequence would be kind of the goal, but that's really hard to do. Any one of those three things is just extremely hard to meet, and then the ideal catalyst would actually check all of those boxes. And so it's a high mark to meet, and that's why there's relatively few large scale polymerizations that come online decade over decade. So the constrained geometry catalysts that John Burkaw, who you mentioned earlier, had pioneered the ligands, at least in academia, and then they were translated into titanium and zirconium chemistry at Dow and Exxon. That's one of the really big success stories within the last, 30 years or so in terms of polymerization technology. So,
and has that
happening in industry that happens under the radar because it's all patented and trademarked?
Yeah, okay. I was just going to ask about that, but I was going to say, generally speaking, I don't think we've really moved away from Ziegler monotype and catalysts, right?
I mean, I'm definitely underselling a lot of really amazing chemistry that happens in industry. It's just less obvious, the stuff that's happening, unless you're really in the patent literature and plugged into people in those companies, because it's not as easy to access that information as the academic literature. So really, it's a matter of visibility. There's still lots of amazing stuff that happens in those areas, and just in terms of industrial research groups.
Kind of a shame it's blocked behind patented stuff. All right, well, that's a whole philosophy argument. It's like, should this stuff be open access? Just with everything. That'd be pretty interesting. One of these days we can see what's going on behind the scenes at those industry chemistry type complexes. But
yeah, well, that's why it pays to make acquaintances and conferences and whatnot with not just other students in academia, but also people who are in industry already. Is you'll get a lot of those tidbits just in networking with people in those sectors. So one of the many benefits of science communication and going to conferences when you're a student is it seems like a kind of this secret magical thing until you meet people, right? And you make those connections, and then you hear these stories, and you it's extremely fruitful. So for anybody who's like on the fence about going to conferences, like there's so many fringe benefits other than, just giving a poster or going to a talk here or there. That networking stuff is really one of the best parts about being in science, making those connections and sharing those stories.
One might even say the post session is the worst part. I mean, especially, well, it depends on the conference you go to. Obviously, the Gordon conferences, which, by the way, I've never been to, but what I've heard is that, smaller venue types is where you can actually talk about your research is very fun. But it's really, everything always comes back to, like, who you know, and cultivating those relationships. And, it's what it is at the end of the day. So for sure, I cannot wait to get to some conferences someday.
Yeah. If you ever have the chance, or anybody listening, to go to a Gordon, it is usually a really great experience. It's by far my favorite conference is the Gordon Conference Series.
I'll sure be going soon, next 3 years or so while I'm still here as a graduate student. One other thing I wanted to ask.
I was going to plug a really good one that's near us, the Inorganic Reaction Mechanisms Gordon Conference is down in Galveston every other year. So I guess that'll be 2025. If they keep the current schedule, will be the next one down there. That's a really fun one.
Yeah, I've heard good things about that one too. I don't know when it is. I think it's this summer. Or is it in March?
It's in the spring each year, usually in March. So it should be really soon.
Yeah, it's really soon.
It is an every other year conference, whereas some of the others that I like organometallics and organic reactions and processes, they're annual.
Yeah. We'll get over to those conferences soon. Maybe I'll do like a live podcast from the conference. How fun would that be? That'd be really cool.
They have a lot of technology restrictions, so they may
it's all proprietary.
It may be a little bit surreptitious if you're really gonna commit to doing it.
Well, I might like. What if I like set up a table and like I had 2 microphones and 2 headsets, and like anyone can come up and we'll start talking. Like that's how it would work, and I just record it live. Because apparently with the software, like I can do like live stream, so I could like live stream the podcast. Like I think it'd be super fun. Like, and then obviously we have all these industry people, all these students here, and then they want to come up and talk. Like we'll just talk, and like that'd be pretty fun, I think. And
it'll be like the red carpet interviews at the Oscars. You just catch people on the walk away from the poster session thing.
I'll set up at 1 a.m. when everyone's leaving the bars too. I'll set myself up there.
Sound bites around that time of the night.
That's such a good idea. I'm gonna keep that in mind. One other thing I wanted to ask you about Japan though is like, obviously like, you met your wife there. So, what were like some of your like favorite things to do, outside of chemistry over in Japan?
So we would frequently just spend our weekend time around Tokyo. She's walking down the stairs now.
She heard her name.
I'm doing a podcast with Aiden.
Oh.
And he's asking about you right now. Actually, we're talking about in Tokyo.
Oh.
I'm in Tokyo.
Tokyo's overrated.
Yeah.
No.
That's not what I was going to say. I mean, we were speaking about food culture earlier, and for sure that was one of the highlights. For sure was all these little restaurants here and there that we would go to that had not just the different styles of Japanese cuisine, but international things. Everything you can think of really is you could find in Tokyo. You could eat at the same different restaurant every day, basically for the rest of your life. Probably there's enough turnover and enough but the chefs who had lived in France for a few years and got trained in classic French cooking, and then came back to Tokyo and opened a restaurant. Like stories like that over and over again. It's reiterating that theory that they just when they put their mind to something, they really are dedicated to that particular pursuit, and they perfect it, and that plays out many times over in the food world. And so you go to these little restaurants where they're extremely focused. They have small menus, one style, and they perfect it. And that's fun when you're a foodie kind of person to go eat at these sorts of places. So we had our list and we had our favorites, and that was usually our weekends were structured around where we're going to go eat for the most part. And so we would go to a lot of the Japanese gardens, visit some of the highlights like Tokyo Tower or Skytree, frequently visit some of the really ritzy shopping areas and mostly window shop, because most of that stuff is like way out of the price range of an academic, especially a postdoc at the time.
Window shopping is a very fun thing to do, though. It is dream about the things, I guess.
It's very cool. And even their grocery stores in those particular areas like Ginza, and you've seen probably YouTube videos about these things, right? Where they have like $300 watermelons, square watermelons, and $100 clusters of grapes and things. And these are like strawberries are incredibly expensive, but also they look fake. They look like somebody them. They're too perfect.
The square
watermelon. I mentioned that. So
do they Do they grow that there? Like, I don't even know.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Right. The mangoes.
I have no idea.
And the melons. The melons are probably the most expensive thing, right? The most expensive fruit are the melons. Those things are in the many hundreds of dollars sometimes.
Wait, why? Like,
they're basically perfected. They'll pick almost all of the fruit off of a particular tree or plant, and let the plant focus all of its energy on that one particular fruit, and then they'll pick out the best of the lot from all of those. And they're basically bred to be extremely high in sugar content and aesthetically beautiful. And they're all basically covered in some kind of like a kind of cloth type material to make sure the bugs don't hurt any of the outside through the lifetime. This is like this laborious process to make this amazing thing. And then oftentimes nobody can afford to buy these, but they'll be kind of a special occasion gift. We'll buy these things for a really special gift for somebody or a business or something.
Well, for my birthday, you don't have to buy me a $400 watermelon. I'll tell you that much.
Okay. You can probably assume that there's not one of those in your near future. I don't know where to get that in the U.S. even.
I always ask you about this, but I feel like the cherry blossom tree, right? Is that a Japanese native tree? Okay.
Yeah, so
that one I actually really like a lot.
The cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C. were originally a gift to the U.S. from Japan, and then they cultivated them around the National Mall and elsewhere. I'm not sure if that's true also for the cherry blossoms that are in Philadelphia, but I assume probably.
I don't know where the cherry blossoms are in Philadelphia. I have to go find them because I really like those trees. Some of that pink.
It's really like my favorite things for sure.
What about?
He knows. We've already covered that.
What are we not covering?
Oh, you want him to do the same? Oh, she says that you should find a Japanese woman and marry her too.
Oh, yeah?
Did I misquote you?
No, that's what I said.
Oh, okay. Well, this is Miha's because they're nice, she says.
Well.
Okay.
No.
I'm just relaying what I just heard. Don't shoot the messenger.
Got any nieces?
Anyway, but cherry blossoms like in Tokyo is just absolutely phenomenal. Of course, it's hard. I've always thought that it would be amazing to go back to visit, but it's so hard to predict when it's going to happen year over year that you can't really plan a vacation around it, which is very sad, I think. If you could go anywhere in Japan, maybe you could just travel to wherever the season is peaking if you missed it by a few days here or there. But otherwise, the more reliable thing is the fall colors are also almost as beautiful, in my opinion. Especially the University of Tokyo main campus has these really mature ginkgo trees, and that's really the symbol of the university is the yellow ginkgo leaf. And in the fall, and especially late November, early December, it's just beautiful. The entire campus is just like carpeted in these beautiful yellow leaves, and you walk through these corridors where the trees overlap, and beautiful time.
I definitely appreciate that because in the Northeast, obviously, like we actually have a fall, but when you drive past the mountains in like October, I mean, you're like, there's yellow, brown, red, orange. Like the scenery is just crazy. That's something I really miss about the Northeast is like actually having a fall, and seeing all those colors. So I would like to see that over how that is transferred in Japan. That'd be really cool, I think.
Well, definitely. I mean, if you get up into the mountain areas, you would see, I think, very similar things if you hit it at the peak season. So I would say that the apex, if you could ever do it, is there's if you take the Shinkansen, the bullet train from Tokyo towards the western part of the main island, you basically loop around Mount Fuji. And if the weather's clear, you could see all of the foliage and the slope up to Mount Fuji, plus the peak of the volcano. You'd have to get really lucky with the weather, but hypothetically, you could really see something that time of the year. That's a really nice train ride for that reason.
Yeah. How like is it? And it's also like pretty geologically diverse too. Like there's a lot of different landscapes, right? Although you can't. Can you swim in the ocean though? Is it warm enough to swim in the ocean? I don't know.
Well, in
Probably not.
Tokyo Bay, I don't think for water quality reasons you would really want to do it too much. But,
I've swum in. Listen, I swim in the Atlantic Ocean. It's probably good.
I think for the most part, for most of the year until maybe the peak of summer, it's pretty much it's on the cooler side for sure. I think even in the Tokyo area. Anecdotally, what I would say is it seems like most of the times a typhoon makes its way past the southern Kyushu island towards the mainland. It usually makes a right-hand turn back out into the Pacific, or it kind of fizzles. So I take that to mean that the water is cool enough over the main island usually to kind of suck the energy out of the typhoons. But that's about all I could really say.
Wait, I have a question about that. So what's the difference between like a hurricane and a typhoon? Is there actually a difference?
I believe the main difference is Atlantic versus Pacific Ocean.
Oh, so it's a lingo thing. Interesting. Oh, good to know. I guess as we're kind of wrapping up here a little bit, one of the other things that ask you about is what do we do now? What are we doing here at Houston? So you had a brief stint at Princeton, but now you're a full professor here at the University of Houston. Well, not full professor. I'm sorry, associate professor, I should say. Which actually I still don't really understand. Well, I guess I understand assistant professor. That's like before tenureship, and the associate professor, and that is tenured. So what's full, like? I don't understand what's the difference between like associate and full.
Some universities still have two levels of associate. So from MIT is the one that comes to mind that first promotes to associate without tenure, and then associate with tenure. So there's basically 4 levels. Yeah, so associate to full is really mostly a title change, and there may be some kind of administrative privileges associated being full professor. For instance, some maybe voting rights in particular universities. But I think the main difference primarily is it's a salary jump and prestige jump more than anything.
Okay.
But yeah, I think there's a bigger difference between assistant and associate at the distinction of being non-tenured and tenured. That's a huge difference.
So, associate professor here at the University of Houston. What do we work on, Professor Carrow? What do we do?
You're asking about our group's research?
Yeah. What do we do now? What keeps you up at night?
Well, I think we kind of carry on the spirit of thinking about mechanistic organometallic chemistry and doing catalysis, and a foci on transition metals as being the kind of center of the action, so to speak, in developing organic reactions and methods to make polymers. So, in the broader sense, some of our research thrusts are pretty heavily focused on making more sustainable polyolefins, thinking again about using the power of functional groups in a polymer chain to either facilitate their depolymerization or facilitate their degradation in a precise way, and trying to use that function to help alleviate some of the recycling pitfalls that the current generations of plastics faced. And so issues of separation, depolymerization, purification, and then ultimately reuse with properties that are attractive and generate market value, so that they get reused over and over again. But on the other side, we still think a lot about fragment coupling methods as well. And of course, this is chemistry that you work on. We have a pretty long history since the group's inception doing palladium chemistry, because it's helped us do a lot of our mechanistic studies. It's one of the great metals in that way. In addition to it being versatile in organic synthesis, it's very nice and conducive to studying mechanisms, because you can see a lot of these reaction intermediates. But
you really can do everything.
There's a lot of value ultimately in transitioning moving up a row to the 3D metals and developing reactions more and more with earth abundant metals. Or similarly, thinking about issues of sustainability. So, coupling reactions are some of the few organic reactions outside of the world of polymer chemistry that actually do get scaled up to relatively large scale. So I do think this is a really nice area for the development of using more sustainable metal catalysts, because I think that the larger the applications, the larger the scale, the bigger the impact in the sustainability sense, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's exciting time. Eventually, I'll have a podcast where I'll be able to present. I guess maybe my research, we can kind of get into it a little bit more. But right now, I'm just kind of like, still figuring that stuff out right now. So I don't really have anything to report on. But I promise the viewers one day, like, we'll have some stuff to report on. Just give it some good time. It's a very exciting time to be in the Carrow group. I think we have a group, really tight knit group of second years that really ambitious, and it's exciting time. I think so. It's gonna be next 3 years, I guess, 3-4 years.
I don't think it'll be hopefully not that long, but
is it 3 years? I don't know. 3 years, I think, at this point. Yeah, so it'll be good. Yeah, I think today was a very fun episode. Speaking to you offhand, any other advice you want to give to any prospective, like, let's say, undergraduate chemistry students out there struggling?
Struggling?
Yeah. Any words of wisdom?
Struggling to do what?
Just anything. You have any words of wisdom?
Well, I mean, one can hope that they're studying, if it's chemistry or whatever it might be, that's their calling, right? I think it's you want to do that thing that speaks to you, right? It's tough to be kind of forced into a path that you don't want to go down, right? And in some cases, it may be because you just thought this was something you wanted to do, and then it turned out to be something different than what you believed. But at the end of the day, there's no shame in changing directions if you found something that's not your calling. But otherwise, that nose to the grindstone mentality, as long as it's not a toxic situation, if it's just an aspect of, you're working on a research project that's not bearing fruit as soon as you thought it would, or you're trying to study a new subject area that seems much harder than you thought it would be, or it's just not making sense, that uncomfortable feeling oftentimes is what we feel when we're really pushing our boundaries and trying to expand what we can do, right? And in hindsight, you'll often look back at that and feel like it was really a test of your grit, so to speak, and you'll look back on it as an accomplishment that you kind of stuck at it and pushed through that barrier. But ultimately, I hope everybody can find something to love in what they're studying, because this is it's something that I love to do, right? It's a fantastic aspect of the job, is that every day you might learn something new. And that was ultimately one of the reasons that chemistry was a calling for me, is it was always really exciting to learn the reason that certain things happened in the world around you, right? As corny as it sounds, one of the things I distinctly remember wondering as a kid was why toast turned brown in the toaster. I know it turns brown, and I know it tastes good, but I wanted to know specifically what is happening that makes the color change. And of course, we can explain that at the level of chemistry now, right? But it's those sorts of little things that you take for granted until you really stop and think about, why is that really happening? And yet, and there's this discipline where you have this level of understanding that explains so many things in the world around you. And every day you can learn about a new thing and find a thread and pull on it. And that was something that is rewarding over and over again, right? There's always things that annoy you about whatever you're doing, right? If it's a job or you're in school or whatever, nothing's perfect, right? But remembering that the reason that you do it, if you still have that, and it still speaks to you, then it's something that I think is really worthwhile. So if you like the process of learning, this is a great thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, being a researcher, you really are on boots on the ground, figuring out the answers to these questions, and it's gratifying if you pursue that. So keep asking questions, everyone. Well,
ask for questions, ask for help. Yeah.
I think another episode in the bag, and thank you Professor Brad Carrow for your time. And, once we get some, like I mentioned, once we get some, not just myself, but once we get some real hard data on some of our research projects going on in the lab, this conversation is definitely not ended. So we'll have to bring you back on in the future. We'll talk about that.
Okay.
Alrighty, everyone.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Lovely.